really thoughtful Devar Torah and the message that we should be looking at things from both sides and reconsidering our first idea is such an important lesson for all of us. It's what Torah study is all about, is to get us to think bigger and more deeply than we would otherwise. Yesher koach to both of you for your Divrei Torah. Now, Cole, you thought about the great flood that destroyed the world, and you considered what it was like for Noah to start over after the catastrophe. And Jonah, you thought about the Tower of Babel and what it was really about and what it meant that people were trying to reach the heavens. And in a way, both of your Divrei Torah were about the sky. The deluge of rain that fell from the sky, the rainbow in the sky that served as a promise that the world would never entirely be destroyed again, and the human attempt to touch the sky. It reminds me, reading both of your Divrei Torah reminded me of a few verses from the book of Deuteronomy. Speaking about Torah and how to live a life of blessing and not curse, Moses says to the people, Lo bashamayim hi, it is not in the heavens. That you have to go to the heavens to get it and bring it back. No, he says, it's very close to you, in your mouth and in your heart to do it. Moses' message, Torah's message, God's message through Moses, is that we should focus on our own plane, our own realm. It's true that there will always be things that are bigger than us and that are out of our control. But there is enough that we can do right here on earth to create a world of blessing. Writing about our Parsha, Aviva Zornberg reviews the Midrashim about Noah. In the Midrash, the rabbis imagine Noah going through a total transformation while he's in the ark, becoming a new person once the catastrophe of the flood has already begun, once it's upon him. Then he springs into action. Then he prepares just the right food for each animal on the ark, feeding and caring for every animal according to its needs. Then he becomes sensitized to life. He feels responsible for life. The Midrash goes so far as to say that he doesn't sleep for an entire year. So active is he in caring for the animals and in dealing with the consequences of the catastrophe. The dramatic change is notable in Noah because Noah famously does not do anything before the flood to stop it. In the same set of Midrashim, the rabbis compare Noah unfavorably to Abraham, who takes action twice to prevent disaster. Noah, on the one hand, simply obeys God's command to build an ark, to gather the animals. And when he's told that all of life on earth, except for the inhabitants of his vessel, will be destroyed, he mutely gets inside the ark and closes the door. Is it because he's selfish? Is it because he's apathetic? Is it because he lacks compassion for others? He has been accused of all of these things. But it might be that he's frozen in fear. It might be that he sees the oncoming cataclysm and doesn't know what he can do to make a difference. He cannot go up to the heavens and stop the rain from falling. He cannot build a tower to touch the sky. It all feels too big for him, too far out of his control, maybe even unstoppable. But what the Midrash teach us is that Noah had the ability to spring into action. He had the ability to mobilize and do what needed to be done. Think about what a difference it would have made if all the energy Noah spent after he was in the ark, bobbing on the waves, was spent instead before the flood began. What if his year of sleepless nights were used before the flood, convincing God not to bring the flood at all, just like Abraham got God to change God's mind about Sodom and Gomorrah? Or what if Noah had sprung into action, going door to door to warn the people and convince them to change their ways? What if he'd mobilized when he first heard about the flood? There could have been a different outcome. He could have saved a lot of lives and prevented a lot of harm. I think a lot of people in this country right now, maybe a lot of people in this sanctuary, can relate to Noah's feeling of immobilization, of being frozen in fear. It seems that pretty much everyone in our country, regardless of where they are on the spectrum, is feeling afraid right now about Tuesday's election. And I see a lot of people trying to distract themselves just to get through these days until it's over. Instead of being frozen in fear right now, instead of waiting until after the fact to deal with the catastrophe, after it's too late to affect the results, you and I have the ability to spring into action right now. Instead of waking up a week from now and wishing we had done more, wouldn't it be so much better to do every possible thing we can do now? I read in the Times yesterday that there are two kinds of undecided voters in this election, though we usually only talk about one kind. We usually only talk about the people who don't know who they're supporting. But actually, there's a much greater number of people who don't know whether they will vote at all. The 2020 election had the highest level of voter turnout of any election in 100 years. But even in that election, 1/3 of voters did not vote. 1/3. That's more than 80 million people. That means we have no idea what the outcome of this election will be. No one knows. It will depend entirely on who goes to the polls in the next 3 days. If even a small percentage of people who weren't polled because they're not considered likely voters go out and vote, that's easily more than the margin of the polls in all the swing states. Anything can happen in the next 3 days. Our country's fate hangs in the balance. Given the stakes of this election, everyone should be encouraged to cast a ballot. Going door to door to get people to the polls, to increase participation in our democracy, is a really good thing to do in general. And we happen to live next door to the most pivotal state in the outcome of this election, Pennsylvania. If you're feeling worried or anxious or stressed about next Tuesday, what could be a better use of your nervous energy than getting out the vote in Pennsylvania? If you're afraid to hope, or you're about to slide into despair, what could be more uplifting than joining other volunteers in Pennsylvania? If you can't stand waiting for the results, what could be a better way to spend the time than knocking on doors in Pennsylvania? If you have plans here in Brooklyn, ask yourself whether 2 weeks from now you will be glad you kept your plans, or whether you will wish you canceled them to help with this election in Pennsylvania. A year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, someday when you're talking to your grandchildren, what's the story you want to tell about this week of your life, about your role this week in the life of our country? This is my plea to you, those in the sanctuary, those watching online, those who will see this on social media or hear it in podcast form. Drop everything and go to Pennsylvania, unless you are having surgery or you're needed here imminently to save a life. And there are, of course, some people who physically cannot do this. But if that's not you, what possibly is more important right now? Go tomorrow, or go Monday, or by far most importantly, go Tuesday. And I won't be offended if you get up right now and go. Bring your kids, bring everyone you know with you. Truly, what is more important? If every member household of this congregation just got one unlikely voter to the polls, that would be 1,286 votes. The 2020 election was decided by 10,000 votes in one state and 12,000 votes in another. We could make an appreciable difference. Simply Google the campaign of your choice if you want to figure out how to do this. Or the words "Get Out the Vote Pennsylvania," and you'll find lots of organizations able to find you a way to plug you in. Noah, our biblical ancestor, waited to spring into action until the flood had already come. And he took care of the creatures who were suffering in the wake of that disaster. But by the time he took action, it was too late to prevent the disaster itself. Lo bashamayim hi, it is not in the heavens. We don't have to build a tower to the sky to prevent this catastrophe. We don't have to wait for a rainbow to appear in the sky after we've already learned how to live with a new reality. We can instead act now. May the next few days bring blessing and not curse to our country and to our lives. Kenny Hiratzon.